Hey, what's up? It's a Fit Gear Hunter, and today we're going to talk about a more in-depth look at the Garmin Epix regarding battery life. So I had a number of people sort of ask about what the battery life would be like with the always-on display off, and I also had people bring up the fact that you could have always-on display, but when it does a wrist raise gesture, it doesn't fully illuminate the screen. So I wanted to actually give some detailed testing because this is hot off the press, is new to the market, and it's got a whole new technology, battery capabilities. So I wanted to be able to take it through the ringer a little bit more, and that's what today's review is all about. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing for more. I've got the Instinct 2 arriving any day, as well as a number of other tests sort of also going on in the background. I got a tweak video, sort of like a special video I'm going to release soon, which will have a couple of cool things in it. So in this review, we're going to test it under a few basic parameters. It's always set to medium brightness, and we're going to look at the watch in a second to take a look at some of what these things mean. Medium brightness, and the pulse ox, which is one of the primary sensors which can cause battery drain, is just set to during sleep. So whenever I set my sleep hours, 12 to 7, whatever it tends to be, it'll turn on the pulse ox and look for pulse ox and not look for it otherwise. But it's basically medium brightness in a workout, out of the workout, you know, like 5% brightness during sleep, and otherwise it's all dependent on when the screen is awake. So the first test is going to include always on display and the wrist gesture on. So when you raise your wrist, you get a fully illuminated screen. The second test is going to be always on display, but with the wrist gesture off. And I'll show you where this is in the watch in a second. And so when you raise your wrist, it stays in the muted, more dim, always on display version. You tap the screen like that, or you push a button and it fully illuminates. What is the test, how much battery life we're getting there. And then the last, we're going to look at the screen off, and it's only illuminated when you do a wrist gesture. Now you could take it to a whole new level, and only when you push a button or touch the screen does it illuminate, which would extend it out even further. But either way, we're going to look at it just, you raise your wrist just like an Apple Watch, and it will fully illuminate what is the battery life there. So we're going to look at the watch, just look at a couple places you might tweak these things. We're going to glance at the app. I don't even know if we're going to go into the app, but maybe I'll throw in a snippet there. And then last, we're just going to simply look at the chart and the results and come back together and talk about it. Okay, so here you have it. You'll see in a second, it'll go to the always on display, and there it is. So this is the non-fully illuminated. So again, I have the wrist gesture off. So every time you do a wrist gesture, it stays in that muted space, and you can have the touch screen on, and you can have a button press on. It's supposed to be that if you put your hand over it, it's supposed to go to to the always on dim version, but that only works some of the time. So let's look at a couple of the settings. So again, to get the settings, you can add into your controls, just as an FYI. You can add into the controls the brightness. So medium is basically 2/3 bright. You can make it even a little bit brighter, obviously less bright, but that's a quick shortcut just to change the brightness. You actually have a setting in here as well to turn off the display if you want the display off or on for always on. And then in the settings, so you could scroll all the way down. It's at the bottom setting in the setting called systems on the watch. But the other way is to go through go up into the bottom of the setting group and go into system. Then you go into the display, and you can change the brightness during a few basic aspects. During an activity, general use, just this is the day-to-day part, and during sleep. So we're just going to look at general use. So I have always on display on. Brightness is set to medium. We just saw that. Alerts means that if you get some sort of notification, it will appear automatically on the watch. And I love this because I don't have to wrist raise to be able to see a text message. And you can see the wrist gesture is off. So again, if you turn the wrist gesture on, timeout is 8 seconds. So these are the basic settings. I tend to keep the always on display fully illuminated in a workout, and then sleep, just have it be whatever it is out of the box. I think it's like 25% brightness. It's like, goes into the lowest possible setting. So now, sorry if that last part just seemed cut short, just clipped off the end. So now, if you go into the watch, like the picture of the watch with the little green dot, it dives into the watch setting. Here you can adjust any of the settings to your very heart's content. So we're just going to, again, go into the system settings. This is where you'll find backlight and display. It's always listed in this display towards the top, and there you have those three main aspects. During an activity, what will the display do? General use, outside of an activity is the other way to say that, or during sleep. So we go into general use, and we can see that now I can turn off the wrist gesture so that it doesn't go to full brightness when you raise your wrist. Leave the always on. During an activity, you see I have wrist gesture on, I have always on, and I have everything on. And then during sleep, here's where you can see the brightness is low, and you could even set it to be ultra low, which is about 25% brightness. So it has the capabilities to set the display during all of those three basic things, and that's where you would make the adjustment to conserve battery life. The other thing you could look at within this is sensors and accessories, pulse oximeter, and you could set it to off, manual check, you know, that would save some battery life, because again, when you set the pulse ox on during sleep, it's just going to say, okay, what did you set your do not disturb hours to be? And if you set your do not disturb hours to be from midnight to 7 a.m., then it's going to start looking for that pulse ox during that time period. So there it is, folks, and we will talk about it in summary. All right, so looking at the first test, always on wrist raise. Yes, so always on display. Whenever you lift the wrist, it will fully illuminate the display, the medium brightness, and pulse ox on at night. So throughout a bunch of different tests, you can see the time to total drain and the number of days it would average out. I don't know how I got that 7.3, but if you look at the average of all of those, it brings out the total time to drain from 100 to 0, about 150 hours, and number of days, 6.24. So we're clearing over 6. And then next test is always on display. When you do a wrist raise, it just stays in that muted, more dim, always on display until you touch the screen or push a button. And then it's medium brightness and pulse ox on at night. So you can see over to the right, the averages are higher, 6.7, 7, 6.45, with a total average time of 6.77. I think it was probably targeting a little more towards 7 from what it felt like I was testing. But again, when you do a wrist raise and it does not fully illuminate the screen, you're getting 6.7 days, almost 7. Now, if you just do wrist raise only, so the always on display is off, and it's completely, the screen is off until you raise your wrist, and then it's back to the same medium brightness and pulse ox on at night. You can see this is just one long test, 67 hours, averaging a target of about 13.3 days. So again, 13.3 days. And what does that look like in each of those testing? Okay, so always on, the screen fully lights up when you raise your wrist, medium brightness, get about 6.24 days. Always on screen, but when you raise your wrist, it does not fully illuminate, getting about 6.75 days, maybe closer to 7. And when you have the screen off and it only turns on when you raise your wrist, you're getting about 13.3 days. So let's talk. So there you have it. If you have an always on display, and anytime you lift your wrist, it's fully illuminating, you're getting a little over 6 days. Now that is impressive. Obviously the battery will, slowly not work quite as long over time, but I'm still clearing 6 days, which is fantastic. But the one thing that one viewer said, hey, if you actually don't have it fully illuminate when you do a wrist gesture, it'll save more battery life. I'm getting between 6.75 and 7 days if I just have it to where I can see the time at all times, because that's the fundamental thing. I'm getting almost 7 days or just under 7 days. And if you don't want the screen on and you just want it to illuminate when you raise your wrist, you're getting over 13 days of battery life. Now this is fantastic for an AMOLED display. It's amazing because all the original Apples would only fully illuminate when you raised your wrist. There wasn't an always on display option, and it still was the same pathetic 22 hours of battery life. I will say, in that time of testing for like the 3 days I tested it with the always on display off, I hated it. I mean, I just want to be able to glance down and just take a peek and see what time it is. I don't need it to be super bright. I just need to be able to glance down and see what time. I don't want to do like this just to be able to see what time it is. So, and we can see some of the settings. You could have it to where the notifications don't automatically appear, and that would probably save you some battery life. But I definitely want that, and I love that Garmin has the capability to do that. So again, if you're in a meeting, you get a text message, you can just peek down. You don't have to go that to be able to see the notification to appear. You just peek down, and the notification's just automatically going to pop up there, and you can sort of glance to see if it's a disaster situation or one that can be ignored. So that is the full and a little bit more detailed battery life testing for the Garmin Epix. It's a figure hunter. Thanks so much for watching.